The notification on my phone at 2:30 in the morning sent ice through my veins. Motion detected. Equipment shed. Police dispatched. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribcage as I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. The security camera feed loaded, and there she was, clear as day under the motion-activated floodlights. Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president of Meadowbrook Commons, was using my spare shed keys to unlock my equipment shed door. The same keys I kept in a lockbox mounted inside my garage. The same garage that had been closed and locked when I went to bed 3 hours ago. My name is Harold Bennett, and I had lived in this suburban Phoenix, Arizona neighborhood for exactly 8 months. 8 months of constant harassment from Patricia and her band of HOA zealots. But this was crossing a line I never imagined anyone would cross. I was already pulling on jeans and a shirt when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Secure Watch monitoring. "Mr. Bennett, this is Daniel from Secure Watch. We've received an alarm from your equipment shed and have dispatched Phoenix PD to your residence. They should arrive within 5 minutes. Are you currently safe inside your home?" "Yes, I'm safe. But I can see who triggered the alarm on my security feed. It's my HOA president. She's literally breaking into my shed right now." There was a pause. "Sir, you're saying you know the individual." "I know who she is. What I don't know is how the hell she got my keys or why she thinks she has any right to be in my shed at 2:30 in the morning. Please remain inside your home until the police arrive, Mr. Bennett. Don't confront the individual." I agreed, but I was already moving through my house to get a better vantage point. My property was a corner lot with a decent-sized backyard, and I had invested in a serious security system after the 3rd time Patricia had sent me violation notices for infractions I hadn't committed. The equipment shed sat near the back fence, away from the house, and held about $30,000 worth of landscaping equipment for my side business. Through my bedroom window, I could see Patricia inside the shed now, holding what looked like a measuring tape and a camera. She was documenting something, taking photos with her flash going off every few seconds. The audacity of it made my blood boil. The first police cruiser pulled up within 4 minutes, lights flashing but sirens off. A second followed 30 seconds later. I met the officers at my front door, my phone in hand with the security footage ready to show them. Officer Martinez was a no-nonsense woman in her late 30s who listened to my rapid explanation while her partner, Officer Chen, moved toward the backyard with his flashlight. I pulled up the security footage from the beginning, showing Patricia approaching my closed garage door. "This is from about 15 minutes ago," I explained, my voice tight with anger. "Watch. She goes right to my garage door and enters the code on the keypad. How does she even know my code? Then she goes inside, and you can see from this interior camera angle, she goes straight to my lockbox on the wall and opens it. She takes the keys to my equipment shed and walks out." Officer Martinez's expression hardened as she watched. "And you definitely didn't give her permission to access your garage or your shed?" "Absolutely not. I've been in bed since 11:30. I had no idea she was even here until the alarm company called me." Officer Chen's voice crackled over Martinez's radio. "We've got a female individual in the shed. She's claiming she has authority to be here." "Of course she is," I muttered. Officer Martinez gestured for me to follow her to the backyard. We walked around the side of the house, and I could see the shed's door standing wide open, light spilling out from inside. Patricia's voice carried across the yard, shrill and indignant. "I am the president of the Meadowbrook Commons Homeowners Association, and I have every right to inspect this structure. It violates our CC and Articus, and I'm documenting evidence for our legal proceedings. Madam, I'm going to need you to step out of the shed, Officer Chen said firmly. Patricia emerged, her blonde hair slightly mussed, wearing a cream-colored cardigan over her pajamas and tennis shoes. She was 52 years old, as I knew from the HOA directory, and had the kind of pursed lip expression that seemed permanently etched on her face. She clutched her phone and a yellow legal pad to her chest. Officer, this is HOA business. This resident has repeatedly violated our community standards, and as president, I have the authority to investigate violations. At 2:30 in the morning, Officer Martinez asked, her tone ice cold. By breaking into his locked garage to steal his keys. I didn't break anything. I used the access codes that all board members are entitled to have. I stepped forward, unable to contain myself. You are not entitled to my garage code, Patricia. You are not entitled to enter my property without permission, and you are definitely not entitled to steal my keys and break into my shed. Patricia's face flushed red. That shed is an unpermitted structure that violates our architectural standards. It's too close to the fence line. It's not an approved color, and you're running a commercial business from a residential property, which is expressly forbidden. The shed is legal, permitted through the city, and you know it because I sent you a copy of the permit 3 months ago when you first complained about it. I turned to Officer Martinez. I want her arrested for breaking and entering, trespassing, and theft. You can't arrest me. Patricia sputtered. I'm the HOA president. That doesn't give you the right to enter someone's property illegally, Officer Chen said. He held out his hand. I'm going to need to see those keys, madam. Patricia clutched the keys tighter. These are evidence of his violations. Those are his stolen property, Officer Martinez corrected. Hand them over now. The standoff lasted about 10 seconds before Patricia reluctantly dropped the keys into Officer Chen's palm. He handed them to me, and I felt a small measure of relief as I closed my fist around them. How did you get my garage code? I demanded. Patricia lifted her chin defiantly. The HOA maintains master access to all electronic entry points in the community for emergency purposes. That's not legal, I said flatly. You can't just decide you have access to people's private garage codes. Officer Martinez was already writing in her notepad. Madam, I'm placing you under arrest for criminal trespass and burglary. You have the right to remain silent. Burglary. This is absurd. I'm performing my duties as HOA president. But Officer Chen was already guiding her hands behind her back, snapping handcuffs into place. Patricia's protests grew louder and more frantic as they read her Miranda rights and walked her toward the patrol car. Lights were coming on in neighboring houses now, faces appearing in windows. Mr. Bennett, we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, Officer Martinez said. Can you do that first thing in the morning? Absolutely. And I have more security footage to provide. This isn't the first time she's trespassed on my property, just the first time I've had video evidence. The officer nodded. Bring everything you have. We'll also need to document the entry point to your garage and the shed to establish the break-in. Would you mind if a detective comes by tomorrow afternoon to do a thorough investigation? Whatever you need. I want this documented completely. As they drove Patricia away, still protesting loudly from the back of the patrol car, I locked my shed and returned to the house. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline, and I knew I wouldn't be sleeping again that night. Instead, I made coffee and began compiling every interaction I had ever had with Patricia and the HOA board. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky when my phone rang. It was my attorney, Marcus Reeves, returning my emergency message. Harold, what the hell happened? Your voicemail said something about the HOA president getting arrested. I walked him through the entire night, from the alarm to Patricia's arrest. Marcus listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes. "Okay," he said when I finished. "This is actually good for us in a twisted way. We've been building the harassment case against the HOA for months, and this gives us concrete criminal behavior to point to. But we need to be strategic here. Patricia is going to claim she had authority, that the HOA bylaws give her inspection rights. She stole my keys, Marcus. She broke into my garage to get them. I know, and that's clear-cut criminal trespass and burglary, but she's going to make this messy. First thing, I want you to check your closing documents from when you bought the house. Look for any language about HOA access rights or master keys. Second, pull your HOA bylaws and CC and Articus. We need to know exactly what they say about inspections and entry. I've read them cover to cover. There's nothing that gives them the right to enter locked buildings without notice or permission. Good. Third, compile every single violation notice, fine, and communication you've received from the HOA since you moved in. Every email, every letter, every text message if she ever texted you. We're going to establish a pattern of harassment. I was already pulling files from my desk drawer. I've got all of it. Patricia has sent me 17 violation notices in 8 months. Most of them are bogus, like the one claiming my lawn was too tall when I had literally mowed it that morning. Or the one saying my house number wasn't visible enough, even though it's a 7-inch brass number right next to my front door. Perfect. And Harold, don't talk to anyone from the HOA board without me present. Not Patricia, not any of the other board members. They're going to try to do damage control, and anything you say can be twisted. We talked for another 20 minutes, strategizing. By the time I hung up, I felt more prepared, but the anger still simmered in my gut. I had moved to Meadowbrook Commons because it seemed like a nice, quiet neighborhood. The houses were well maintained, the streets were clean, and the community pool and park were attractive amenities. But Patricia had targeted me from day one. It started with a violation notice about my lawn before I had even finished moving in. I had boxes stacked in my garage and was unloading a U-Haul when she appeared at my door with a printed notice, clipboard in hand. "Welcome to Meadowbrook Commons," she had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, HOA president. I wanted to introduce myself and let you know that your grass is currently 0.75 inches above the maximum allowed height of 3 inches. You'll need to mow it within 48 hours to avoid a fine." I had stared at her, sweaty and exhausted from moving furniture. "I just bought the house 3 days ago. I don't even have a lawn mower here yet. That's not really my concern. The rules apply to all residents regardless of circumstances. It's all in the CC and Articus you signed when you closed." She had walked away before I could respond, leaving me holding the violation notice and wondering what I had gotten myself into. That was 8 months ago, and it had only gotten worse from there. My equipment shed became her obsession 2 months after I moved in. I ran a small landscaping business on the side, mostly helping out some commercial properties on weekends. I had checked the city ordinances and gotten all the proper permits to build the shed, which was a nice 12 by 16 structure with proper ventilation and electrical. It housed my commercial mower, edger, blower, and various tools, and it was positioned exactly 3 feet from the fence line, which exceeded the city's required 2-foot setback. But Patricia claimed it violated the HOA's architectural standards. She said I needed pre-approval for any structure over 10 by 10, even though I had submitted plans to the architectural committee and received approval before construction. When I showed her the approval letter with the committee chairman's signature, she claimed the approval was invalid because I hadn't submitted detailed color samples. The shed was gray. Plain, neutral gray that matched probably 40% of the houses in the neighborhood. She had fined me $500. I had refused to pay and filed an appeal with the HOA board. They had upheld her decision in a meeting where I wasn't allowed to present evidence or speak in my defense. I had paid the fine under protest and immediately hired Marcus to fight it. That was 3 months ago. Since then, Patricia had ramped up her harassment. Violation notices came weekly, sometimes twice a week. My trash cans were visible from the street for 30 minutes after the garbage truck came, fine. My car was parked in the driveway overnight instead of the garage, fine. I had a wreath on my door outside of the designated holiday decoration period, fine. The most ridiculous one was when she cited me for creating a public disturbance because I was using power tools in my garage on a Saturday afternoon. It was 2 in the afternoon, well within allowable noise hours, and I was building shelves. 3 neighbors had been using lawn mowers at the same time, but only I got the violation notice. I had documented everything, taken photos, kept records. Marcus had told me we were building a solid harassment case, but I had never imagined Patricia would escalate to actual breaking and entering. At 7:30, I headed to the Phoenix Police Department's Desert Valley precinct to give my formal statement. Detective Sarah Okonkwo met me in a small interview room, a laptop and legal pad in front of her. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming in. I've reviewed the initial report from Officers Martinez and Chen, and I've watched the security footage you provided to them last night. I have to say, in 15 years of police work, I've never seen an HOA president caught on camera quite so clearly committing burglary." I managed a tired smile. Patricia's nothing if not bold. We spent the next 90 minutes going through everything in detail. Detective Okonkwo was thorough, asking about my security system, the lockbox where I kept the shed keys, my garage code, and most importantly, how Patricia could have obtained that code. "When you set up your garage door opener, did you choose your own code or was there a default code?" she asked. "I set my own code. 4 digits, not a pattern or anything obvious. I'm the only one who knows it. And you've never shared it with anyone? Family, friends, contractors? No one?" "Well, my brother knows it, but he lives in Seattle and hasn't been here in months." Detective Okonkwo tapped her pen against her notepad. "Miss Hendricks claimed the HOA maintains master access codes for all electronic entry points. Is there any way that could be legitimate?" "I have no idea how they would even get that information. The garage opener is a standard residential unit I bought at Home Depot and installed myself. There's no master code system for residential openers like that. Could someone have watched you enter the code? Maybe filmed you from a distance?" The thought made my skin crawl, but it was possible. I suppose so. Patricia walks around the neighborhood constantly, always with her phone out, supposedly documenting violations. She could have filmed me without my knowledge. The detective made notes. "We'll be subpoenaing her phone and any other devices she might have used. If she did film you to get the code, that's additional charges. Stalking, potentially. I want to press every possible charge. This isn't just about last night. Patricia has made my life hell for 8 months, and I have documentation of all of it. I understand, and we take this very seriously. Burglary is a class 4 felony in Arizona. The fact that she did it as part of a pattern of harassment works against her. However, I need to warn you that she's going to have a defense. She'll argue she had authority as HOA president, that she was acting in the scope of her duties, that she had reason to believe the shed contained evidence of HOA violations. But she didn't have authority. The bylaws don't give her that right. We know that, and the prosecutor will argue that. But criminal cases can be unpredictable, especially when you have a defendant who can afford a good lawyer and will claim she misunderstood the scope of her authority. What helps us is the time, the manner of entry, and the clear premeditation. She didn't knock on your door and ask. She didn't send a notice requesting access. She snuck onto your property in the middle of the night and stole your keys. That's hard to explain away. I left the police station feeling somewhat better but still frustrated. I wanted Patricia in prison for what she had done, for the months of harassment and stress. But I also understood that the legal system moved slowly and didn't always deliver the justice victims wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Linda Carmichael from the HOA board. We need to discuss Patricia's arrest and your accusations. Can we meet this evening?" I forwarded the text to Marcus, who called me immediately. "Don't respond. They're trying to handle this quietly. Probably want you to drop the charges in exchange for Patricia stepping down or some other meaningless gesture. We're not negotiating." Good. I don't want their apologies or compromises. I want Patricia prosecuted. That's the right call. But be prepared for them to make things difficult. If Patricia has been running that HOA board with an iron fist, the other members are either afraid of her or complicit in her behavior. They're not going to turn on her easily. Marcus was right. Over the next few days, 3 more board members tried to contact me. Robert Finch, the treasurer, left a voicemail asking me to consider the community's reputation. Janet Summers, the secretary, sent an email suggesting we could work this out amongst ourselves like neighbors. And Dennis Walsh, a board member at large, actually showed up at my door at 6 in the morning. I answered in my bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, and stared at him through the screen door. "Harold, we need to talk about Patricia," Dennis said. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and a perpetual sunburn. "This situation has gotten out of hand. Patricia broke into my property and stole my keys. That's not a situation that got out of hand. That's a crime. She was trying to enforce the community rules. Maybe she went about it the wrong way, but her heart was in the right place. Her heart was in the right place when she committed felony burglary at 2:30 in the morning." I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. "Dennis, go away. If the board wants to communicate with me, do it through my attorney. Come on, don't be like that. We're neighbors. We should be able to work this out. We're not working anything out. Patricia committed a crime against me and she's going to face the consequences. Now leave my property before I call the police for trespassing." Dennis's face reddened, but he left. I watched him walk down my driveway and across the street to his own house, shaking his head like I was the unreasonable one. The neighborhood had taken sides, I realized over the following week. Some residents avoided eye contact when I drove past. Others went out of their way to wave and smile, giving me thumbs up. One neighbor, an elderly man named George who lived 3 houses down, stopped me while I was checking my mail. "Good for you," George said quietly. "Patricia's been a tyrant since she took over the board 4 years ago. Most of us are too afraid of retaliation to say anything, but we're glad someone's finally standing up to her." "Has she done this kind of thing to other people?" I asked. George looked around nervously, as if Patricia might appear from behind a tree. "Not exactly like this, but she's made life miserable for lots of folks. The Hendersons down on Oakwood Drive. She fined them so much over their landscaping that they finally just sold their house and moved. Young couple, couldn't afford to keep fighting. And the Rodriguezes on my street, she reported them to the city for running a business from home because Carla does hair in her kitchen for a few friends. City inspector came out, found nothing wrong, but it was stressful for them. Why hasn't anyone voted her out? We've tried. But she controls the board meetings, controls who gets on the ballot for elections, controls everything. And she's got a few loyalists who back her up no matter what. It's like trying to fight City Hall, except City Hall lives 3 streets over and sees every time you take your garbage out 10 minutes too early. I thanked George for the information and made a mental note to tell Marcus. If we could establish that Patricia had a pattern of harassment toward multiple residents, it would strengthen our case that her actions weren't legitimate HOA business, but personal vendettas. Patricia's arraignment was scheduled for 2 weeks after her arrest. Marcus and I attended, sitting in the gallery as she appeared before Judge Theodore Morrison. Patricia had hired Richard Ashford, a prominent Phoenix defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. Ashford argued forcefully for dismissal, claiming Patricia had acted within her authority as HOA president and that this was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, countered with the security footage and the clear elements of burglary, unauthorized entry, and theft. Judge Morrison was a stern-looking man in his early 60s who listened with his fingers steepled in front of his face. When both sides had finished their arguments, he spoke. "Miss Hendricks, I've reviewed the evidence provided by the state, including the security footage. I'm also familiar with HOA law in Arizona, having dealt with several cases over the years. While HOAs do have certain rights to enforce their rules, those rights are limited by property law, trespass law, and basic constitutional protections against unreasonable search. Nothing in Arizona's HOA statutes gives you the right to enter locked structures on private property at 2:30 in the morning without notice or consent." Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but Judge Morrison held up his hand. "I'm setting bail at $5,000, and I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing you from contacting Mr. Bennett or entering his property for any reason. This matter will proceed to trial unless a plea agreement is reached. Next case." As we left the courtroom, I felt vindicated. The judge had seen through Patricia's claims of authority, and she was facing real consequences. But Ashford caught up with us in the hallway. "Mr. Bennett, Marcus, can we talk for a moment?" Marcus put a hand on my arm. "What's on your mind, Richard?" My client made a mistake in judgment. She's willing to apologize and make restitution. If Mr. Bennett drops the criminal charges, Patricia will resign from the HOA board, pay for any damages, and agree to a permanent restraining order. "No," I said immediately. "She doesn't get to buy her way out of this." "Harold's not interested in a deal," Marcus added. "Your client committed a serious crime, Richard. She needs to face the consequences." Ashford's expression hardened. "You understand this is going to get messy, right? We'll subpoena every interaction you've had with the HOA, every payment you've made or haven't made, every violation notice. We'll argue that you've been a problem resident from day one, and that Patricia had legitimate concerns about illegal activity on your property." "Bring it on," I said. "I've documented everything and I've got nothing to hide. Patricia's the one who broke the law." As we walked away, Marcus squeezed my shoulder. "That was the right call, but he wasn't bluffing. They're going to try to put you on trial instead of Patricia. Be prepared for them to dig into every aspect of your life. Let them dig. They won't find anything because I haven't done anything wrong." The trial was set for 3 months out, and those 3 months were some of the most stressful of my life. True to Ashford's word, the defense subpoenaed everything. My banking records, business records, tax returns, communications with anyone related to the HOA. They deposed my neighbors, my business clients, even my ex-girlfriend who I had dated briefly before moving to Phoenix. They also launched a full-scale assault on my reputation within the community. Patricia couldn't contact me directly due to the restraining order, but her allies on the HOA board could. The violation notices didn't stop, they increased. I was cited for weeds in my gravel landscaping that didn't exist, for parking violations when my car was in the garage, for noise violations when I wasn't home. I documented every single one, photographed everything, kept meticulous records. Marcus filed harassment complaints, and eventually, we got a court order requiring the HOA to stop issuing violation notices to me unless they could prove actual violations with photographic evidence and third-party witness statements. That slowed them down, but they found other ways. The community newsletter, which Patricia usually wrote, started featuring articles about problem residents who think rules don't apply to them, and the importance of maintaining community standards against commercial enterprises. She never mentioned my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I also pursued the question of how Patricia got my garage code. Detective Okonkwo called me 6 weeks after the arrest with an answer. We went through Patricia's phone and computer, and we found something interesting. She had installed a network camera on a tree across from your house, aimed at your driveway and garage. The camera was connected to her home Wi-Fi and recorded continuously. She was surveilling my house for at least 3 months, based on the file timestamps. We found footage of you entering your garage code dozens of times. She must have watched the videos and figured out the code. Is that legal? It's a gray area. Recording from a public street isn't necessarily illegal, but recording someone's private property without consent can be. In this case, because she used the information obtained to commit a burglary, it becomes part of the criminal case. The DA is adding charges of stalking and unlawful surveillance. The additional charges seem to shake Patricia's legal team. Ashford called Marcus twice more to discuss plea deals, each time with better offers. But I held firm. Patricia had terrorized me for months, had violated my privacy, had committed crimes against me. I wanted her to face trial. The trial began on a hot August morning. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was packed, not just with the usual court personnel but with residents from Meadowbrook Commons. The case had become local news, with the Phoenix New-Times running a story titled HOA Horror Story, When Community Leaders Become Criminals. Jury selection took a full day. Ashford tried to eliminate anyone who had ever had a negative experience with an HOA, while Jennifer Walsh focused on finding jurors who understood property rights and privacy. In the end, they seated 12 jurors, a mix of homeowners, renters, and a couple of retirees. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Jennifer Walsh walked the jury through the timeline of that night, showed them the security footage multiple times, and called witnesses to establish each element of the crime. Officer Martinez testified about finding Patricia in my shed. Detective Okonkwo explained the investigation and the discovery of the surveillance camera. I testified about the months of harassment and the lack of any permission for Patricia to enter my property. The security footage was damning. The jury watched in silence as Patricia confidently entered my garage code, walked inside like she owned the place, opened my lockbox, took my keys, and proceeded to my shed. There was no mistaking her identity, no question about her actions. Ashford's defense strategy was to humanize Patricia and argue that she had made an honest mistake about her authority. He called character witnesses who testified that Patricia was a dedicated community volunteer who cared deeply about maintaining property values. He called HOA experts who explained the broad responsibilities of HOA boards. Then he called Patricia to the stand. She wore a conservative blue dress and minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She looked like someone's sweet aunt, not a criminal defendant. "Miss Hendricks, can you explain what you were doing on Mr. Bennett's property that night?" Ashford asked gently. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I was trying to protect our community." Mr. Bennett had built an illegal structure. He was running a commercial business in violation of our rules, and he was refusing to cooperate with the board. I had received complaints from multiple neighbors about noise, about commercial vehicles, about strangers coming and going at all hours. I felt it was my duty as president to investigate. "Why didn't you ask Mr. Bennett for access?" I had asked, multiple times. He refused every time, which made me believe he was hiding something. I was concerned about illegal activity, possibly even dangerous materials or stolen property. I felt I had to act. Why at 2:30 in the morning? I couldn't sleep. I was so worried about the situation. I decided to do a drive-through of the community to check for violations, and when I passed Mr. Bennett's house, I just felt compelled to finally see what he was hiding. It was a well-rehearsed performance, but Jennifer Walsh destroyed it on cross-examination. "Miss Hendricks, you testified that you were concerned about illegal activity. Did you call the police?" "No, I didn't think that was necessary." "You thought there might be dangerous materials or stolen property, but you didn't think police involvement was necessary." Patricia hesitated. "I wanted to gather evidence first." "Evidence for what? If you suspected criminal activity, isn't that what police are for?" "I wanted to handle it internally through the HOA." Jennifer pulled up a document on the screen. "This is the Meadowbrook Commons HOA bylaws, correct?" "Yes." "Can you show me the section that gives you the right to enter locked structures on homeowner property without permission?" Patricia's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. Patricia shuffled through papers, clearly flustered. "It's implied in the enforcement provisions. The board has the right to investigate violations." "Investigate, yes, but break into locked buildings, steal keys, conduct surveillance." Jennifer's voice rose. "Miss Hendricks, isn't it true that you had harassed Mr. Bennett since the day he moved in? That you issued 17 violation notices in 8 months, most of which were baseless?" "They weren't baseless. He was violating community standards." "You cited him for noise when he was building shelves in his garage on a Saturday afternoon. Was that a violation?" "He was creating a disturbance." "At 2 in the afternoon, during normal hours, when 3 of his neighbors were mowing their lawns at the same time." Ashford objected and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Patricia's veneer crack, had seen the vindictiveness underneath. Jennifer continued. "Miss Hendricks, let's talk about the surveillance camera you installed across from Mr. Bennett's house." "When did you install that?" "I don't remember exactly." "Was it before or after he refused to let you inspect his shed?" "I think after." "So when he exercised his legal right to deny you access, you decided to spy on him?" "It wasn't spying. I was monitoring compliance." "From a hidden camera that recorded his private property for months?" "Miss Hendricks, you watched those recordings until you figured out his garage code, didn't you?" Patricia's face flushed. "I needed access to investigate violations." "You needed access to harass him, didn't you?" "Because he dared to stand up to you, because he refused to be bullied." "Objection." Ashford was on his feet. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Move on, Miss Walsh." But Jennifer had made her point. She walked Patricia through her history with the HOA, establishing that she had been president for 4 years and had been involved in multiple disputes with residents. She introduced testimony from George and two other neighbors about Patricia's heavy-handed tactics. The closing arguments came down to a simple question. Did Patricia have the right to do what she did? Ashford argued that she had acted in good faith based on her understanding of her authority. Jennifer argued that ignorance of the law was no excuse and that Patricia's actions were premeditated, criminal, and part of a pattern of harassment. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. On the count of burglary in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of criminal trespass in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of stalking, we find the defendant guilty. Patricia collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Her husband, who had attended every day of the trial, put his arm around her shoulders. I felt a rush of relief so powerful that my knees went weak. Marcus gripped my arm, grinning. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. During that time, I learned that the HOA board had held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. They also voted to settle my lawsuit against the HOA for $50,000 and to revoke all violation notices issued to me. At sentencing, Judge Morrison was not sympathetic. "Miss Hendricks, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust egregiously. You targeted Mr. Bennett with harassment, violated his privacy, and committed serious crimes against him. Your actions have brought shame to your community and damaged the reputation of HOAs generally. While I note that you have no prior criminal record and that you have supporters in the courtroom, I cannot overlook the severity of your crimes." He sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, with 18 months suspended. She would serve 18 months, followed by 3 years of probation. She would also have to pay restitution of $10,000 and complete 100 hours of community service after her release. As marshals led Patricia away in handcuffs, she looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. I met her gaze without flinching. She had tried to destroy me, and instead, she had destroyed herself. The aftermath was slower and more complicated than the trial itself. The HOA board underwent a complete overhaul, with 3 of the 5 members resigning. A new election brought in residents who were committed to transparency and reasonableness. The new president, a retired teacher named Susan Park, reached out to apologize personally for everything I had endured. "What Patricia did was unconscionable," Susan said when we met at a coffee shop near the neighborhood. "The board should have reined her in years ago, but we were afraid of her. I'm truly sorry you had to go through this." "I appreciate that," I said. "I just want to live in peace and not worry about someone invading my property." "You won't have to worry anymore. We're rewriting the bylaws to include clear limits on enforcement actions and a process for residents to appeal violations without fear of retaliation. And we're instituting term limits so no one person can dominate the board for years." Those changes made a real difference. The harassment stopped completely. I continued my landscaping business without interference. The neighborhood felt genuinely neighborly for the first time since I had moved in. George and I became friends, along with a few other neighbors who had been silently suffering under Patricia's rule. We started a monthly barbecue group, rotating houses, and slowly rebuilt the sense of community that Patricia's tyranny had destroyed. The story made national news in a small way, picked up by a few websites that specialized in HOA horror stories. I did a couple of interviews with local reporters, careful to focus on the importance of standing up against harassment and knowing your rights. Marcus and I wrapped up the civil case against the HOA, settling for the $50,000, and an agreement that all records of violations would be expunged from my file. I used some of that money to upgrade my security system even further and to create a scholarship fund for legal assistance for other HOA victims. About a year after the trial, I got a letter from Patricia's lawyer. She was up for early release based on good behavior and wanted to include a letter of apology to me in her parole packet. The letter was attached. I read it with mixed feelings. Patricia wrote about how she had let power corrupt her judgment, how she had lost perspective and become the very thing she had once opposed, an unreasonable tyrant. She acknowledged the harm she had caused and expressed genuine remorse. I talked it over with Marcus, who advised me that supporting her parole application was entirely my decision and wouldn't affect me legally either way. I thought about it for several days. In the end, I wrote a letter to the parole board stating that, while I supported her early release if she had demonstrated genuine rehabilitation, I would never forget what she had done. I hoped she had learned from her mistakes and would never again abuse a position of authority. I sent the letter and tried to put the whole experience behind me. Patricia was released after serving 14 months. I never saw her again, as her probation terms included staying away from Meadowbrook Commons. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had moved to Tucson, where she lived quietly and had no involvement in any HOA. 2 years after the arrest, on a warm October evening, I stood in my backyard looking at my equipment shed. It was still gray, still positioned 3 feet from the fence line, still perfectly legal. Inside was my equipment, secured and safe. No one was going to steal my keys or invade my privacy again. The security system cameras blinked their steady red lights, recording everything, protecting everything. I had learned a hard lesson about the importance of documentation, of knowing your rights, and of refusing to be bullied. My phone buzzed with a text from Susan, the HOA president. She was asking if I wanted to join the architectural committee to help review applications from other homeowners and ensure the process was fair and transparent. I smiled and typed back a response. I'd be honored. The Meadowbrook Commons newsletter arrived in my mailbox the next morning, filled with community news and updates about the fall festival. There was an article about welcoming new residents and treating everyone with respect. There was a reminder about following community guidelines, but it was phrased politely, without threats or ultimatums. I read through it while drinking my morning coffee and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. This was my home, my community, and it was finally acting like one. The equipment shed stood solid in my backyard, a reminder of everything I had fought for: my property, my rights, my peace of mind. Patricia had tried to take those things from me, but she had failed. The justice system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. I finished my coffee and headed to work, driving past houses where neighbors waved and smiled genuinely. The nightmare was over. The community had healed. And I had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing to do. Standing up to Patricia had been terrifying. Pressing charges had been stressful. Going through the trial had been exhausting. But it had been worth it, not just for me, but for everyone else who had suffered under her tyranny and been too afraid to fight back. As I pulled out of the neighborhood, I saw the new entrance sign that the HOA board had installed. Meadowbrook Commons, a community of respect. It was a simple message, but it meant everything. The sun was shining, the desert sky was clear and blue, and I was free. Free from harassment, free from fear, free from the woman who had thought she could steal my keys and invade my property without consequences. Patricia had learned that no one, not even an HOA president, is above the law. And I had learned that documentation, persistence, and the courage to stand up for yourself can overcome even the most dedicated bully. It was a lesson I hoped I would never need to use again, but one I would never forget. My equipment shed stood as a monument to that lesson, its gray walls solid and secure, protecting what was mine. And that was exactly how it should be.